Henry Osawa Tanner. He was the oldest of 9 children. He was born June the 21st, 1859 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Tanner's parents were cultured and educated. They owned property. His father was born in a family that had been free for several generations. Benjamin Tucker Tanner was a minister and a scholar, prominent in the African Methodist Episcopalian Church. Bishop Tanner was considered a progressive preacher in his day because he was an abolitionist.
When the country is finally really put together and the deal is made to keep slavery in portions of the U.S., to keep the Union together, it seems as though within the church community that gave sanction to begin doing the same thing in the church. Richard Allen, our founder, was a member of St. George's Church in Philadelphia. And this was a place where, when he first arrived, he could worship and sit wherever he wanted. And new laws began to creep into the worship. And blacks were then made to sit on the outside aisles. Blacks were then later moved to the back of the church. And then finally, a new balcony was built. And little did Richard Allen and others know who were helping with the fundraising effort to build the balcony, that once it was completed, that the balcony was intended for them to sit in. And so one Sunday morning, they show up, the new balcony is open, they go to their old seats, and the trustees of the church redirect them to the balcony. And right in the middle of worship, as they're praying, one of the trustees of St. George's comes over and begins yanking on the arm of Absalom Jones, Richard Allen's kind of partner in ministry. And Allen opens his eyes and he looks, and this guy is literally like trying to yank Absalom Jones up off of his knees in the middle of prayer. And so Jones tells him, if you let me finish my prayer, I'll leave and you'll never be bothered by me again, essentially. And certainly after the prayer is over, Allen and Jones kind of look at each other and they both stand up, and a whole group of people just get up with them and they walk out, never to return. And that is how Mother Bethel really began.
This is a bust of Bishop O. Tanner. He was very instrumental in the African Methodist Episcopalian Church, the beginning of that church. Henry O. Tanner's mother, Sarah Tanner, the granddaughter of a white plantation owner, was a private school teacher and a former slave whose mother sent her north to Pittsburgh through the Underground Railroad. Henry O. Tanner's middle name was derived from Osawi Tomi, the town in Kansas where, in 1856, the white militant John Brown launched his anti-slavery campaign. In 1866, when Tanner was 7, the family moved to Philadelphia, which had one of the largest urban black population and a sizable black middle class. By 1868, Henry enrolled at the Robert Box Consolidated School for Colored Students, which had a liberal arts curriculum. He graduated as valedictorian of his class. Then, at 13, Henry watched as artists worked in the city's Fairmount Park, and a teenager decided to become an artist. The compositional element used by that artist, a middle landscape with a prominent foreground, remained with Tanner over his entire career. Although initially reluctant, Tanner's parents eventually responded to their son's desire to pursue an artist's career and encouraged his ambitions. Tanner discovered early on in his career that an artist had to sell his work to live, so he created drawings and illustrations to sell books and magazines. Self-taught Tanner first painted marine scenes, then animals from the Philadelphia Zoo. In fact, you're looking at one of his illustrations for the Hopper's Young People's magazine from 1888. Tanner's unwavering desire not to be, and I quote, one of your everyday kind of artist, end of quote, led him to realize he needed formal training. In the 1870s, race relations, were changed enough by the Civil War for young Tanner to take art lessons. Also, his family had enough money to provide him with the best art education at the Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts, which was open to African American students. In 1879, at 21, he enrolled in the prestigious Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, studying sporadically until 1885 with the renowned artist Thomas Eakins. Eakins became one of America's most famous photographers and artists, and was Tanner's first inspirational teacher and mentor. Tanner was impressed with Eakins' portrayal of African Americans in his art as natural and dignified subjects, as you can see in this piece by Thomas Eakins called Negro Boy Dancing from 1878. Eakins also taught Tanner how to use his drawing talents with color, contrast, and how to use photography as a preliminary study tool. What you're looking at, unfortunately, it's a little out of focus, is one of Henry O. Tanner's earliest paintings, untitled, and you can see some of Eakins' influence. Tanner's New York debut came in April of 1885. He opened his studio in Philadelphia the following year. Then in 1889, he moved to Atlanta and opened a photography studio, which proved unsuccessful. After a summer in the highlands of North Carolina, he taught drawing at Clark University in Atlanta. And this is one of his paintings that he created during that time. This is called Georgia Landscape from 1889. You can see that it's a little dark. And again, you can tell that he has utilized photography, which would have been at his infant stage at this time, as a tool for this particular landscape. Alexander Minter said Tanner decided to leave for Europe after he was taunted in a small Pennsylvania town where he had moved to paint. And I quote, "Tanner said he couldn't go on painting there. It was too uncomfortable. He could not paint in an atmosphere where he was not accepted." End of quote. This is a drawing by Tanner. It's just called Half-Length Study of a Bearded Man with Long Hair. This is 1891. So we know that Tanner is teaching drawing. He's also still learning his craft. In 1891, Tanner went to Paris, France to escape racism. He studied under Jean-Paul Laurent at the Académie Julian and joined the American Art Students Club of Paris. This is one of his drawings called Study of Negro Man from 1891 through 1893. Tanner is still learning. Like his teacher Eakins, he created his subjects with strong sense of modeling and psychological penetration in numerous sketches and paintings. This is one of his studies called Bagpipe Lesson from 1892. Illness brought Tanner back to the United States in 1893. Then he created Spinning by Firelight, commissioned by George Washington Gray, a friend of the Tanner's family. Those funds helped Tanner return to Paris, where he settled permanently and acquired an international reputation. But before he left for Europe, Tanner turned his attention to the subject matter of his race. After a brief return to Philadelphia in 1893, he painted The Banjo Lesson, a realistic study of Black life. Tanner wanted to represent Black subjects with dignity, and this is what he wrote, and I quote, he said, "Many of the artists who have represented Negro life have seen only the comic, the ludicrous side of it, and have lacked sympathy with an appreciation for the warm, big heart that dwells within such a rough exterior." End of quote. You see, the banjo had become a cliche, a caricature of insipid, smiling African Americans strumming the instrument and dancing. In The Banjo Lesson, Tanner tackles the stereotype head on, portraying a man teaching his young protege to play the instrument. The large body of the older man lovingly envelops the boy as he patiently instructs him. If popular 19th century imagery of the African American male had devastated him of his authority and leadership. Tanner's banjo lesson recreated him as a father and a mentor. The banjo lesson is about sharing knowledge and passing on the wisdom. This painting was accepted in the Paris Salon of 1894. That year, it was given by Robert Ogden of Philadelphia to Hampton Institute near Norfolk, Virginia, one of the first and most prestigious black colleges founded shortly after emancipation. Hampton Institute lent it to the Atlanta Cotton State, an international exposition of 1895, where it hung in the Negro Building. Since white critics ignored the work, Booker T. Washington encouraged black Americans to buy reproductions of this painting. And this is why you've seen this painting before and did not know who painted it or why it was so important. And the other thing about this painting that we need to discuss is that, again, look at the light, that beautiful light. He is influenced by the Impressionist, so we get that kind of natural light in the background, the brush strokes. But also he's influenced by Rembrandt, and he would have been influenced by Rembrandt through his instructor, Thomas Eakins. Tanner also painted another African-American genre subject in 1894, the Thankful Poor. John T. Morris, who allowed it to be circulated on loan to the Philadelphia School for the Deaf, purchased the Thankful Poor. After 75 years, it was found in a closet of the School for the Deaf. It was put up for auction at Sotheby's in 1981, and William and Camille Cosby bought the painting for $250,000. This was the highest price ever paid for a work of art by an African American artist in 1891. Later, Tanner abandoned subjects of his race in favor of biblical themes. Some art historians say he abandoned that topic because there were not enough buyers for such paintings. Others argue that he felt unable to paint such American scenes far away in France. When Tanner returned to Paris in 1895, he established a reputation as a salon artist and religious painter, but never again painted genre subjects of African Americans. Perhaps he settled back in Paris, believing he could not fulfill his artistic aspiration while fighting discrimination in America. What you're looking at is the painting that he created, perhaps when he returned home, called Crossing the Atlantic, Return Home, 1894. Tanner spent over half of his life in France. There he found an expansive and more accepting environment, free from racial strife of America. Yet he made it clear that he wished to be identified as black and not be judged solely on his race. The name of this painting is called The Young Sabbat Maker from 1895. This painting, called Daniel in the Lion's Den, won an honorable mention at the Paris Salon in 1895. This was Tanner's first big break. Unfortunately, the painting is lost. This is actually a copy, or the second painting that he created. This is a portrait of Tanner by his mentor, Thomas Eakins, from 1897. This portrait of his mother shows an affectionate portrayal of a robust, sensitive, and thoughtful personality. Also, it refers to the famous image by another American artist, Whistler, portrait of his mother that was created in 1871, and it's at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. Tanner's symbolically placed himself in the company of the flamboyant and controversial Whistler. It's a kind of an intellectual joke that he and his parents would have appreciated, that he made a painting of his mother like Whistler, right? In that same kind of side pose. But if you know anything about Whistler's painting, we always think of it as representational, but Whistler's painting is very abstract, or has a very abstracted kind of background. The French government purchased The Resurrection of Lazarus for the Louvre in 1897, among many honors and awards that was bestowed upon Tanner. This painting also earned him a gold medal from the French artist Paris Salon Society in the summer of 1896.
The Salon, Paris. How strange the city of Paris was. How different the sounds that came to my ears from those in any other city I had ever been in. The clatter of the wooden shoes on the stone pavement, the cries, the whistles, the horns blown, the songs sung, each with its particular meaning. But to me, an incomprehensible din. Strange that after having been in Paris a week, I should find conditions so to my liking that I completely forgot that when I left New York, I had made my plans to study in Rome, and was really on my way there when I arrived in Paris. Tanner, The Story of an Artist's Life, 11770.
I want to talk a little bit about this painting, The Resurrection of Lazarus. I want you to look at the light. Now before I talk about this painting, we got an opportunity to hear what Tanner wrote about his experience being in Paris for the first time in France, Paris, France. However, I want to talk about this painting, and so you get an idea of how he felt, but let's talk about the subject matter. The subject matter here is about Lazarus, right, raising from the dead, and Jesus, as we see the light here, that beautiful golden light, the light is God. So Jesus prays to his Father, and he has Lazarus raised. And so what we see in the upper left-hand corner is we see the witnesses of Lazarus being raised from the dead. And so the beautiful part about this is that light, and everyone in there has that reflection of that beautiful golden God-like light, right? Also, the variety of people, the variety of racial group, the genders. For instance, we see this woman figure holding her head. So everyone here is witnessing this miracle. And what we're looking at is how everyone reacts, right? Also, Tanner has given us a very realistic view of what a tomb or inside a tomb would look like from that period. We see these wooden posts, right, holding up the walls of the cave, of the tomb, right? And around Lazarus, we see the binding cloth that he was bound with. And then we see Lazarus, right? Lazarus, it's as if Lazarus has woken from being dead, but he has his hand across his heart in disbelief, right? And then, of course, you have this elderly man caressing his head, holding his head like a pillow. Beautiful, beautiful, dramatic painting of this religious moment. With the recognition of this painting, Tanner received financial backing from several art patrons. He was now able to travel to expand his art. He went to Naples, Rome, Venice, Alexandria, Cairo, Jerusalem, and Jordan. In his travels, he produced many different works, and this is one of his paintings. Unfortunately, it's in black and white, but the name of this painting is called Jews at the Jerusalem Wailing Wall from 1897. By the mid-1890s, Tanner's increasing faith emphasized itself in religious paintings for which he is best known. The name of this painting is called Abraham's Oak from 1897. we will see this again. The Annunciation, which is thought to be symbolic of African American emancipation. The artist wrote this about this painting called The Annunciation, which was made in 1898. He said, and I quote, "My effort has been not only to put the biblical incident in the original setting, but at the same time give the human touch to convey to my public the reverence and elevation these subjects impart to me." End of quote. This is probably the most modern Annunciation painting that exists at that particular time in 1898. This is the only painting that I've not seen Gabriel, who has always been the messenger in Annunciation paintings that we've seen come out of Europe. Instead, what Tanner has done is eliminated Gabriel, but simply gone straight to God. Again, he uses that beautiful light. That light is God. And so God is talking to Mary, right? Not Gabriel, right? Not Gabriel sending a message from God, but she's having her interaction with God through God's voice, through God's energy. And also, again, that light is radiating throughout the entire interior. And we see an interior that we don't necessarily see in other Annunciations as well. He has the barrel vaults, or we would call it barrel vaulted kind of entry in the back of her, right? She's on a bed, a smallish kind of bed. There's carpet. There's clay stones for the floor. There are tapestries draped around. So again, he is giving us a sense of how it may have looked at that particular time, or giving us a realistic version from the environment in which this Annunciation allegedly had taken place. However, there's an issue here. In 1899, Tanner married Jessie McCullough Olson, a white singer from San Francisco who had been a model for his 1898 painting, The Annunciation. This is a drawing, perhaps even a study for that painting, and this is simply called The Artist's Wife from 1899. However, he could have made it in 1898. So now you see what I mean by there must be there's possibly a problem here, because he wanted to make his paintings realistic, but having his white wife in the painting as Mary, the Annunciation, doesn't make sense, because if she was from the Middle East, she would look like she was from the Middle East. Anyway, back to his marriage. They married in London and settled in France, where they raised their son, Jess. Influenced by Impressionist color and symbolist spiritualism, his works grew increasingly free with jewel-like colors. The name of this painting is called Nicodemus from 1899. Nicodemus was a Pharisee and a member of the Sanhedrin who, according to the Gospel of John, showed favor to Jesus. He appears 3 times in the Gospel. The first is when he visits Jesus one night to listen to his teachings. The second is when he states the law concerning the arrest of Jesus during the Feast of Tabernacles. And the last follows the crucifixion, when he assists Joseph of Arimathea in preparing the corpse of Jesus for burial.
The image of Jesus and Nicodemus, having this conversation is it's one of those favorite sermons, especially for AME preachers, because Nicodemus is, the one who's really, you get a sense from other religious leaders in Jesus's day, who just outright dismissed Jesus. They didn't want to believe it. But if you know the story, you know that Nicodemus was really struggling, which is why he came back to talk to Jesus in the middle of the night. It's middle of the night because he didn't want anybody to know in his circle that he's around here cavorting with Jesus and trying to have this conversation. And it is just I really appreciate the imagery because you feel like when you're looking at it, anyone who's ever wrestled with the decision to follow Jesus, you understand Nicodemus's plight. I want to have faith, I want to believe, but there's so many things that are in the way. And I don't know how Tanner does it, but he just does a great job at communicating that struggle on Nicodemus's part. Nicodemus, is portrayed as this older person. Here's Jesus, this much younger person. And yet the older person who in Jesus's day would have been in the position of authority, the teacher. Now he's, the student at the feet of Jesus and putting himself in a very humble position, which could not have been easy. And again, for those of us who follow what we call the way, that's the first lesson, that you don't know it all, regardless of where you come from. And you have to put yourself in that position to really learn. And somehow, like I said, again, with just canvas and paint, Tanner gets that message across.
Tanner traveled to the Middle East from 1897 to 1898. He created many drawings, many paintings. This is one of his pieces called Head of Jew in Palestine. This is from 1899. The Sienne also indicate that Tanner was familiar with the French Impressionists on-the-spot observation of nature. This is Tanner's Abraham Oak from 1905, and as you can see, it's much lighter than the previous oak that we saw, and it has that impressionistic kind of light. We have a similar tree. In this case, we can see figures, we can see houses, again, and then that light that we see in the sky, again, that's God. That's God. On seeing Tanner's work on view at the Muséum de Luxembourg in Paris in 1901, Booker T. Washington wrote this, and I quote, he said, "Few people ever stop when looking at his pictures to inquire whether Mr. Tanner was a Negro painter, a French painter, a German painter. They simply knew that he was able to produce something which the world wanted, great painting. And the matter of his color did not enter into their minds." End of quote. The name of this painting is called Christ at the Home of Mary and Martha from 1905. The name of this painting is called Christ and His Disciples on the Bethany Road from 1905. Henry O. Tanner eventually gained a following in the States, with W. Du Bois naming him the Dean of Black American Artists in his Crisis magazine. Many young artists such as Palmer Hayden, William H. Johnson, Aaron Douglas, and Hal A. Woodruff visited and received encouragement and artistic advice from Tanner at his Parisian home. The name of this painting is called The Two Disciples at the Tomb from 1906. Now, if we compare this painting, just let's look at the light of this painting and the figures in this painting, and we compare this to Lazarus, right? The raising of Lazarus. We can see the tomb that to your left. We can see the doorway or the capsule that's holding the doorway. We can see that that's moved to the side, and we can see the light, right, coming out of the tomb. Jesus has risen, right? We see that, and we see one figure, one disciple has his hand over his heart, the other one is looking in, and then the light that bathes him. The name of this painting is called The Disciples See Christ Walking on the Water from 1907.
Henry Oswald Tanner's The Disciples See Christ Walking on the Water from 1907. We see a ghost-like figure of Christ walking on the water and the disciples in a boat watching him walk away. This is a marvelously mysterious painting. The painting is illuminated, or the image in the painting is illuminated by moonlight, so there is a darkness to the painting, but at the same time it has this wonderful spirituality. The moon itself is reflected in the water. In fact, most of the image of the painting is of water with a very high horizon line and the Christ figure moving out into that horizon line. So it's a marvelous composition, a very unusual composition, where we see the reflection in the water as the primary element of the painting. Henry Oswald Tanner was an African-American artist who lived within the United States but was forced to go to Europe early in his career. As an African-American artist, he could not find a way to make a living in the United States. This painting is one of my favorite works in the collection of the Art Center. It's one of my favorites because of the potency of the artist's experience, his passion for the biblical subject matter, but also the manner in which it was done. It's very, very loosely and impressionistically painted.
Tanner's fortunes rose substantially at the turn of the century, with a succession of honors and exhibits. He continued to exhibit at the French Salon Society, but also held shows throughout the U.S. The name of this drawing, or it could be an intaglio print, is called Christ Walking on the Water. In 1909, he was elected to the National Academy. This painting is called The Holy Family from 1909.
One of the elements that often comes up in Tanner paintings is light. In one painting, for example, The Holy Family, for many years, looking at a reproduction of the painting, I thought that there was a light coming from a fireplace. But I realized in seeing the painting in person that it's not a fireplace. Mary is sitting looking out at possibly the desert light in either Egypt or Palestine, and the Christ child is in front of her. And she's being dramatically lit by this very strange green light, which the curator at the museum at Muskegon likens to crushed emeralds. It's a supernatural green light in the Holy Family that is illuminating the Christ child and also illuminating Mary. This is what he's trying to get at when he's talking about the human touch, or this universal way of making religious art appeal to people, this spirituality that just invades the environment. These light sources that come from nowhere but are everywhere at the same time. This is really Tanner's message, to find the Christian spirit within everyone. It's just a domestic interior with this weird light coming from outside. And what is that light? Is it the sunlight of Egypt? No, it probably is the Holy Spirit. But it is applied in this thick yellow-green paint, which is remarkably similar to the yellow-green paint applied to the Annunciation and the figure of the angel Gabriel. So he's trying to get at, with paintings like the Annunciation, with the Holy Family, with Nicodemus, at how the Holy Spirit manifests itself in unknowable ways. And how do you make the unknowable visible in paint?
This is another painting by Tanner called Angels Appearing Before the Shepherds. An interesting painting. You can see the shepherds at the lower left-hand side, and then he has this beautiful landscape, rugged landscape, mountainous landscape, and then the spirit of the angels. At the turn of the century, Henry O. Tanner, America's premier expatriate African-American artist, made his first trip to North Africa in 1908. His travels inspired what are considered his Orientalist work and some of his most eloquent biblical scenes. I don't have all of those images, but here is one of the images that he created in Morocco called Morocco from 1902. Here's one of his drawings called Gate in Tangier from 1910. Gate at Tangier is one of Tanner's many pieces that show the sort of shadowy archway connecting the streets and the passages of Tangier, through which draped figures go about their daily activity. Tanner's sensitive treatment of North African subject matter is a marked departure from the eroticized view of the East that was the foundation of many of the European Orientalist traditions. In fact, during this period, the French had a firm hold on Morocco, which is the country that Tangier is located in. In 1923, Tangier became an international zone managed by colonial powers and became a destination for many Europeans and American diplomats, spies, bohemians, writers, and businessmen. That status came to an end with the Morocco independence in phases between 1956 and 1960. So in a way, Tanner creating these images of Tangier is sort of a manifesto, right? Informing people, because at this particular time there was a lot of conflict in Morocco and Tangier between the indigenous people who lived there as with the French invaders. Only after becoming an expatriate in Paris did Henriot Tanner attain international reputation for his poignant paintings of biblical themes. In 1914, he commented on an article about him. And this is what he said. You say, in his personal life, Mr. T had many things to contend with: ill health, poverty, and race prejudice. True. This condition has driven me out of the country, and while I cannot sing our national hymn, still deep down in my heart, I love it and am sometimes sad that I cannot live where my heart is. End of quote. He made this painting called Fisherman in 1913. Again, the thing about Tanner's paintings is that they're right on the edge of being abstractions, right? The compositional device that he uses with this boat in the water and these various incredible angles and beautiful texture and loose brushstrokes, right? And of course, being a fisherman is associated with Jesus, because Jesus was a fisherman. We're back to Daniel in the Lion's Den in 1916. As I said, he made this painting again. I don't know if people know the story of Daniel in the Lion's Den, but again, think about Tanner creating this painting, right? Tanner is a preacher's son. He is spiritual. He's a spiritual man, and he has been, he has been living with church, and he's been living with his father for a long time. And so now he's growing into his own and understanding, right, what he has been trained from a different perspective, right? And what I mean by this is that when we look at this painting called Daniel in the Lion's Den, we see Daniel, right? And Daniel has no fear. And the reason he has no fear is because he knows that the Spirit of God walks with him. In fact, he's lit by God. And you see the lions, they have no interest in him. They have no interest because his faith has given him the peace. And him being at peace, even though these lions are supposedly hungry, right? He has been thrown in the den with hungry lions. They have no interest in him. They have no interest in him. During World War I, Tanner stopped painting temporarily to drive an ambulance in war-torn France. His wife died in 1925, and his son suffered a nervous breakdown soon after. Tanner worked for the American Red Cross Department of Public Information in France during the war. In September 1918, he was granted permission to sketch in the military advance zone. His depiction of African American soldiers is virtually unique among his contemporaries, and what you're looking at is one of his drawings. It's simply called ARC Canteen World War I 1918. And look at this drawing. We're on the opposite side of that counter, or we're behind the server, and notice that the only face that we see that's colored in, or I should say faces, because we see a side version. The only faces that we see that have value, that have form, are the black soldiers. Tanner received the Legion of Honors from the French government in 1923, the country's highest civilian award. The name of this painting is called The Three Wise Men. He made this in 1925. He created this painting, He Healed the Sick, in 1930. This is a portrait of Tanner in 1935. And now I'd like to show you some of his paintings. I don't have dates for them. This is called Virgin Mary, Flight into Egypt. The Savior. Return to the Tomb. Tanner's success was affected by increasing health problems, the economic pinch of the Depression, and the modern styles sweeping Europe and the Americas. Although Tanner remained active until about 1936, he still needed to adjust his expressive style. The name of this painting is called Country Road in France. Again, there's no date. Tanner resisted attempts by African American leaders to enlist him as a spokesman, preferring to concentrate on artistic rather than racial issues. However, his commitment, his spiritual motivation, and international acclaim have inspired generations of African American artists. By 1934, Tanner had outlived his wife, his father, his mother, his sister, and his younger brother. 3 years later, on May 25th, 1937, Tanner died peacefully in his sleep at 78 in his Parisian apartment. Tanner's paintings won him hundreds of world prizes and honors. His works were shown at the Art Institute of Chicago, Milwaukee Art Museum, Toledo Museum of Art, Philadelphia Museum of Art, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, Luxembourg Museum, the Louvre, and countless private collections and exhibitions. He was one of America's first African American painters to exhibit in the London exhibit of 1914, which featured the works of other distinguished American artists such as West, Stewart, Whistler, Homer, and Copley. In 1927, he was elected as a full member of the National Academy of Design in New York. On September the 10th, 1973, the U.S. Postal Service issued an 8-cent commemorative stamp honoring Henry O. Tanner. Oh yes, I'm sure that's worth a lot today. The stamp was issued as one of 4 in the American Art Series in 1973. In 1996, Tanner's painting Sand Dunes at Sunset, Atlantic City was acquired for the art collection of the White House in Washington, D.C. It was the first work by an African American painter to be chosen for this collection. Sand Dunes at Sunset, Atlantic City, as you can see, is a landscape painting with a view across cool grays of shadow beaches to dunes made pink by the late afternoon sunlight. A low haze over the water partially hides the sun. The painting is considered one of Henry O. Tanner's largest, most artistically ambitious, and most beautifully pure landscapes. Recently, some 150 drawings, lithographs, etchings, and watercolors were discovered. They were unnoticed for almost a century in Tanner's dusty old studio in Paris.